I want to thank all of you for attending today. Welcome virtually to the Department of Fashion and Textiles. We are organizing this public event so that we can actually talk with all of our stakeholders in an open platform. We can show what we and our region got to offer and how exciting our subject area is. And that is the real objective of this public events. I am immensely proud today to introduce my good friend and colleague, Mark Jarvis, who is Managing Director of World Textile Information Network. Now, Mark got a degree in material science, and then he completely changed the way in textile and fashion industry we gather information, how we get hold of information, how we use that information, and how we use that information to change our own business models. And more I interact with Mark, more I see his bigger vision of how we need to use data as our friend and our ally. And therefore, I requested Mark to give this presentation on digital transformation of the textile value chain. For me, Mark can really show us how we use that data, blend it with our skills, and change the microenvironment that we work in. And we are enormously proud that Mark is part of our ecosystem, which is the Leeds City region where we operate from. And with that note, I want to hand over the virtual stage to Mark. Mark, the stage is all yours.
Well, thank you, Parik, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here today. And I felt it might be useful just to kick things off and to explain to those of you who perhaps haven't heard of World Textile Information Network, or WTiN, just tell you a little bit about what we're about. I could encapsulate it actually in one word. We are about innovation, innovation in the textile value chain. And our focus, which I'll come on to, covers areas from the technology and the machinery of manufacturing through to the materials and indeed the economics or the business models that are now evolving quite rapidly as we move to a more digitally oriented era. The company, there are 25 of us. As Parik said, we're based here in Leeds at the moment, working a bit of a hybrid existence between this office and working from home. And perhaps just to best illustrate who values WTiN, I can give you a sense of some of our customers who subscribe to our main product, our information portal, WTiN.com. So names that you will have heard of, companies like Nike or Reebok or Hugo Boss. Some names that you may find a little bit surprising, like Google and Microsoft and Apple. And one name that you shouldn't find surprising, and that is the University of Huddersfield. All of you have access to WTiN.com. I hope you check it out daily, but please do make sure that if you don't already, you make sure through the library that what your access is and how you get to access the content that we produce. I think you'll find it really interesting. So we move on, and if we could just move on the slide, please. Okay, great. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a backstory as to how I and WTiN have arrived at what we're going to talk to you about today. And just one word of warning, perhaps. I'm a businessman. I did do a degree many years ago in materials science, but these days I'm a businessman. So this presentation comes at the opportunity that we see from a business perspective. About 4 years ago, I was actually in China for an exhibition. And as I was going around the exhibition, looking at the booths there was something that I'd not seen before that was quite prevalent, and that was the words Industry 4.0. And we'd been hearing something about this new terminology at the time, but it was just the first time I'd really seen it used to such a great degree. Having said that, when I went and asked the people on their booth what that meant, most were unsure, or even admitted that the marketing director had suggested it would be a good idea and people would show interest. The point I'm trying to make is that at that time, people knew something was happening, but they weren't too sure what it was going to mean to them, their products, and to their customers. So I came back, and the first thing I did was I read the book that you can see on the right-hand side. The author is a gentleman called Klaus Schwab. For those of you who don't know the name, he is the founder of the World Economic Forum, but he is an engineer by training. And he laid out very, very clearly in this book the future for industrial manufacturing in our world, all of it revolving around the use of data. And this brought into sort of clarity for me and for the company where we were heading, or where we should be heading as a business with the information that we produce. At the same time, and purely coincidentally, the European Union released the document that you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. It is something that the Textile division of the Union publishes every 10 years. It's, if you like, their plan, their vision for textile and apparel manufacturing in Europe. The previous edition from the mid-noughties had been really accurate in what it said would happen with manufacturing in Europe over that decade. And here we were in 2016 with them laying out the future for the next 10 years. It started with a huge section on the circular economy. It then moved on to talk about advanced digitized manufacturing, or Industry 4.0. It then had a whole section on smart, high-performance materials, and finally, smart products. Those last three all revolve around data. So we took that, if you like, and over the last 4 years, we've developed our products and our own thinking on this area as a result of what happened 4 years ago. The point I'm trying to make is this is all really recent stuff, and the journey has only just started. So, having trouble with the slides here. Could you move it on for me, please? Okay, that's it. Thank you. So this diagram is shamelessly borrowed from Klaus Schwab's book. And the thing I like about it is its simplicity. What it's telling us is that we're at the start of a three-stage journey that will lead to a paradigm shift in the manufacturing of products. And for us, the manufacturing of textiles and apparel. And we're going to start at the point where we are now, where we've been now for a few years, 2 or 3 years, which is agile manufacturing. No, it's not moving on. Okay, thank you. I'm going to sound like someone at the Downing Street press conference now and requesting the next slide, please, because my remote is not working. Never mind. Okay, so this diagram illustrates, again, the history of where we've come from with manufacturing through to where I think we're heading. And if we go right back and look at this line chart, what you can see along the x-axis is the number of variants of a garment that were produced. And so if we go right to the bottom in this area here, pre the industrialization of the manufacturing, we all wore a garment that was made for us. So the variants of a particular garment were very, very, very small. If you like, it was the early days of bespoke tailoring. And what happened around the turn of the 20th century, around 1900, was that we moved to the industrialization of the manufacturing of the garments and what we now know as being ready to wear, where we would purchase the garment off the shelf, ready to wear. And the result of that was that the number of variants of a product actually reduced as the volume of each variant increased. So what we saw was the decline of bespoke tailoring for everybody and the emergence of mass production, volume production of individual garments. And that continued at a pace. The pace increased dramatically in the mid-90s with the emergence of fast fashion. So much cheaper product produced to a high volume because the product was becoming disposable. And around about that time as well, we had the elimination of quotas. Okay. And because of the elimination of quotas, we saw, if you like, the acceleration of the dominance of countries like China. So one example, in 2005, quotas were eliminated and the amount of imports from China into the United States went up by 75%. So we're still in this fast fashion phase of development. But what we see happening now is a return, if you like, to where we've come from. And what we're going to see in the future through the advent of much more agile manufacturing is this ability to create more personalized product and therefore reducing the number of variants, and also the possibility, and I believe it to be a huge opportunity, for the reshoring of manufacturing back closer to the consumer. So you should all be aware that over the last 50 years, the manufacturing base for the world, which was in the UK, in this region, moved to Asia and is now moving again. But I do believe there is an opportunity through this for manufacturing to be reshored. Next slide, please. But let me give you some examples, some of which you may already be aware of new technology that's impacting on agile manufacturing. And we've got here a normal pair of jeans. We're going to look at four parts of this pair of jeans. We're going to look at the embroidery, which is here and here. I hope you can see that clearly on your laptop screens. We're going to also look at the thread that stitches it together, and thirdly, how we sew it together. And then we're also going to look at how technology is creating the distressed age look in this particular pair of jeans. Next slide, please. So each of these examples of new technology, I've got a video that will play whilst I talk to you. This video is about 4 years old, but it's the perfect illustration of this innovative company's product. So this is a product from a Swedish company called Color Reel, and Color Reel uses inkjet head technology produced by Ricoh to color the thread that's being used to embroider the product as you see it here. Now, for those of you not familiar with, if you like, old school embroidery, it would typically be a machine with 10 different, maybe 10 different stations, 10 different colors of thread that would create a particular piece of embroidery. What Color Reel has created is a machine that has one single colored thread that can be colored into millions of different variants, just like the number of colors that we can create on our computers. So what we're able to do is introduce a huge amount more flexibility, agility into this particular part of the manufacturing process. Moving on, the second thing I want to look at in this pair of jeans is, have you moved it on? Is it playing? Lovely. Thank you. This is a company called Twine, and Twine use similar technology to Color Reel, but their focus is not on embroidery. It's on the thread that is used to sew the garments together. And the great advantage, again, of their solution is that you can produce as much or as little, and little is very, very optimal when you're thinking of things like mass personalization, as little or as much as possible of a thread in any particular color. And once again, there are millions of variants of the colors that you can use. The third example is then, if you could move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Robotics, how then we piece together the various parts of, in this example, a pair of jeans. And there are a few very early stage pieces of technology that are able, using robotics like you can see on the screen, to sew together without any need for human intervention a pair of jeans. Why is that important? Well, firstly, for a business, it's important because the sewing sector is worth about $100 billion a year. Secondly, if we are thinking about how agile manufacturing can come back to countries like the UK, then we have to have the ability to sew garments together. And as you probably know, there is a limited skill base still in this country able to do that. Factories in places like Leicester, but not on the volumes that we would be looking for if we're looking to reshore a lot more of our manufacturing. So what we're doing here is using technology to get over the hurdle of not having a skill base big enough for our particular requirements. And the final of these slides, please, Harry. Thank you. And then finally, on this pair of jeans, we've got the distress look, the age look that is so popular in jeans. And here, a Spanish company, Gina Loggia, have a laser solution that you can see on the screen that can distress a pair of jeans in any way you might imagine. So you can select any number of different patterns in terms of how you want the age to look, where you want it to look. And again, this is an automated solution. So once again, we're able to deliver through this digital technology much, much more agile manufacturing. And when you piece all these things together, you start to see the potential for agile manufacturing and the reshoring it back to countries like here in the UK. Thank you, Harry. Next slide. And the next one, please. So here we are back at this journey that we're heading on. We've had a look at the first stage of it, which is the development of technologies and the implementation of technologies to deliver more agile manufacturing. And what we're going to look at now is the second part of this journey, which is material innovation. So there are many examples of what we mean by material innovation. There is intelligent thermal apparel, there is health monitoring functionality and other things. But we believe that the paradigm shift that will happen in the next 5 to 10 years is actually around internet connectivity. And there was a very interesting survey that was conducted by the World Economic Forum in 2015. So it's already 5 years old, already halfway to the year 2025, which is where they had said, where do you think we will be as a world come 2025? And they asked technology, C-level technology individuals, about 1,000 of them. And they asked them lots and lots of examples of things that could happen in the future. We may have had the first 3D liver transplant, or there'd be a city without any traffic lights because our cars are run and directed by computers. But the top scoring example that they felt was the most likely to happen, with a chance of over 90%, was that 10% of people wearing clothes would be wearing clothes that are connected to the internet. Now, we're 5 years away from that, and it may end up being 1 or 2% rather than 10%, but we have already started that journey. I don't know if this sounds like science fiction or just something that's very exciting, but I can tell you that it's already on a very, very small scale. It's science fact. So why would we want to believe? Why would we want to predict that this is going to happen? If you could put the next slide on for me, Harry. So another video. This one, again, it was made about 5 years ago, and it was made by the microchip manufacturer Intel. I'm sure you've all heard of that name. But they created this video by way of looking to illustrate and to plant the idea of what your clothing could achieve if and when we could put microchips into the threads. And those microchips could perform certain functionality, including connecting to the internet. And I'll give you some examples of that at the moment as you look at this video. But the important point I wanted to make here is that Intel want this to happen. And the reason they want it to happen is that when they started as a business, they were putting their chips that were probably the size of a small bar of chocolate into computers, typically business computers, mainframe computers. And over time, and with the introduction of personal computers, that was enabled because the chip size got smaller and the power of the chip got a lot faster. Processing power got a lot faster. And then we moved on to laptops, smaller chips again. We then moved on to mobile phones over the last decade in particular, and more recently, our watches. And all the time, the chips getting smaller and the processing power of those chips getting much more powerful. This is important to Intel because after a few years, that new technology, that new chip that went into a PC becomes a commodity. It doesn't have the value that they need to drive sales and to drive profitability. They're a publicly listed company, and there's some details of them on the left-hand side of the screen. So Intel needs something like this to happen in order to continue their growth, continue to deliver profits, and of course to pay dividends to their shareholders. And they're not doing this alone. If you could move on to the next slide, please. Here's just an example of the patents that have been registered in recent years around the area of smart textiles. Okay, come on to talking about this in a little bit more detail at the moment, but look at the companies in here. Some wouldn't surprise you. We can see Nike, fair enough, but we can also see Philips, and we can see Microsoft, and we can see Apple. So what we're seeing here is the traditional large textile/apparel brands, Adidas, Nike, etc., interested in developing smart textiles for their customers, but also the technology companies looking at leveraging microchips produced by Intel to open up new markets for them and for their products. The important message here is that these are all really powerful companies, so they want this to happen. Let's quickly also, on the next slide, just take a quick look at the work that the academia, are doing, and the number of scholarly publications, sorry. And look how it's increasing in recent years, in the last 5 years, exponentially increasing. This is significant because a lot of the development work that is happening is coming from universities, going into spin-off small businesses, and then being picked up by the big companies, whether they be technology or whether they be brands. So please, this is something that is relevant. This is something that is happening now. And this is something that is starting with the research work that's been doing in many universities around the world. Next slide, please, Harry. So there's a lot of information on this slide, and I don't propose to go through it all. But once again, what I'm presenting is the journey that we are going on with our materials, and particularly our smart materials. So in the last few years, a smart garment, and I'm going to give you some examples in a moment, a smart garment had the technology, if you like, the very thin wiring, and the devices, they were kind of sewn in to the product. In fact, you can Google this. There are examples of this going back 100 years, when dresses in France used to light up for very grand occasions. Where we're at now, we're a little bit more advanced. So we're now weaving into the weave of the fabric sensors, where particularly for monitoring your muscles and what's going on. We'll see an example of that. But where we're heading, and this is the really interesting thing, where we're heading is when all this technology is at a fiber level. Okay, functional yarns where it's at a fiber level. That's where it's particularly interesting. Next slide. Let's look at some examples of this. So some of you may have heard, about 3 or 4 years ago, an initiative led by Google, who then partnered with Levi's. They produced their jacquard jacket, trucker jacket, I think they called it. And in it, this is an example of phase one of these particular innovations in materials. A lot of it was just woven into the sleeve of the jacket, and through taps or through swipes, the jacket connecting to your mobile device via Bluetooth would rewind a song or give you new directions for wherever you were traveling. It was a pretty unsophisticated example of a smart textile. But it was a start, and there were 2 big companies doing it. So it got a lot of attention. And you can still buy these jackets, about £100 £100. Second generation, an example here from Athos. And there are a number of examples of smart textiles being used in garments that will enhance and aid your performance whilst exercising or training. So built into these garments are sensors that pick up various bits of information, maybe your heart rate, maybe how you're using your muscles. It's biometric tracking. And again, though, what we're seeing here is that information then being transferred via Bluetooth to your phone, where the app provides a lot more detailed analysis. So smart apparel used for exercise and the like. And then what I want to then talk about very quickly is where we're heading with the 3rd generation. Next slide, please. 3rd generation of materials. And I think there's a number of examples here where the sensors have been built into the fibers using graphene, where we're printing circuitry onto the fabric. But on the next slide, please, Harry, there's a great example here of where we are now able to embed semiconductors and other devices at the fiber level. So I had the great opportunity last year to visit the MIT facility in Boston. And there is a spin-off from MIT called AFOA, the Advanced Functional Fabrics of America. It's founded about 6 or 7 years ago with federal funding from the Obama administration. If you like, a bit of sort of seed corn capital to get it going. But subsequently, it attracted a lot of investment from large corporates, some of whom we've mentioned already, the sportswear brands in particular, but also critically the US military. So they are sat on an investment of somewhere, I think, in the region of about 500 million US dollars. And they have a couple of facilities at MIT, one that's dedicated to the work that they're doing for the military. I wasn't allowed into that, but a separate facility where they are able to demonstrate the type of work that they are currently doing. And this is just one example. And I saw the machine that made this. This is a diode, a photoelectric diode that has been put into a fiber, polyester fiber, and it has been then woven into a blanket, which you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. And then when connected up to prove it still works, it lights up. Very simple, really. Very, very simple. They then washed that blanket, I think it was 20 times or something, and it still worked because it's embedded in the fabric, so the water doesn't get to it. And I saw this being made, and effectively what they have is what they call a preform plug. And it's about the diameter of a football, yeah, about that high, I don't know, a couple of feet, half a meter maybe. And in there you have the copper, very, very thin strand of copper. You have primarily the polyester, and also you have in there the diodes, the photoelectric diodes. And that gets heated. So if you can imagine heating a piece of plastic, and it gets drawn, okay, until it becomes as thin as a fiber, and then simply after it's been spun, it gets spooled. So it's a very, very simple process, but a very effective one in proving the concept. The challenge for everyone now is how you go from doing that in a laboratory to producing millions upon millions of meters of that same fiber with the diodes or the microprocessors embedded. So industrializing this is now the big challenge. Okay, next slide, please. Just a sense of the scale of the opportunity here. We're forecasting about 30% growth year on year, and we'll get to about $5 billion US dollars by 2025. In the scale of the textile industry, that is still quite small. But my point is this: where will we be in 10 years? Where will we be in 20 years? If this is possible, then the potential for the growth of this market is absolutely huge. Next slide, please. Just another example of where I think we're at the moment. This is an illustration using the Gartner hype cycle. For those of you not familiar with Gartner, market intelligence company, look at a load of different industries, mainly technology industries. And they created this, model, if you like, a number of years ago, maybe 20 years ago, called the hype cycle. And very simply, when a new technology emerges, there is and a technology that really grabs the attention, it begins to grow the expectations of the industry around it. So what you see in this chart is, in a short period of time from the launch of the new technology, there's a rapid growth of expectation about how this technology is going to take off, how it's going to sell loads, how it's going to change the world. And what typically happens is we reach a peak of inflated expectations when we all suddenly realize it's not as easy as that. That work that a FOA did in the lab in creating that fiber with the embedded diodes within it, within the fiber, is very difficult to transition to on an industrial scale. So we crash, the expectations crash to what they call the trough of disillusionment. And depending on your perspective on smart textiles, I would argue is where you would place the green circle that I've placed somewhere down around about the trough of disillusionment. A couple of years ago, we were at the peak of inflated expectations. But I think what we're heading towards as we move over the next year or two is to a more sensible and a more gradual development of this new technology that will ultimately work its way through and into the garments that we wear. Next slide, please. This is an illustration that our team put together last year. It's by no means an exhaustive list of examples of how smart textile technology might be used. What I would say is I think we're only limited by our imagination. The example I used to illustrate that is when Steve Jobs introduced us all about 12 years ago to the iPhone and said, here is an iPhone, it has a platform on it on which people will create apps. And we all said, well, what will those apps be? And they probably had some examples, I can't remember. But none of us would have imagined 12 years ago how those developments of those apps have just changed the way we use our phone, we use our mobile device, and the way that we live. And what we're saying is that the imagination of people like yourselves in the creation of applications of smart textiles, we haven't even started to imagine yet. There is a really exciting future here for everybody. But as you look around the screen and you look at the examples here, everything from alerting parents to when a baby has wet its nappy, to the technology that helps you with your exercise and improving your performance on that, through to applications in your car or around the house. Again, I think the possibilities are limitless here. Next slide, please. Okay, we're back to Klaus Schwab's very useful graph here. And what we're going to look at now is what I call actually the pull economy. And just to give a little bit of background to why this is an important change for those of you who aren't economists, over the last 100 years or so, we have operated pretty much entirely in a push economy. Companies would seek to understand what products their customers were looking to buy. They would seek to forecast what volumes they would purchase, and they would then manufacture those products. They would market them to the consumer or the customer and seek to sell all the products that they had manufactured. So you can see from that why it was called the push economy. It was manufactured, it was pushed out to the customer, and the customer was encouraged to purchase the product through direct sales or marketing or whatever it might be. I think that through what we've been talking about already, through agile manufacturing in particular, and the ability of that to assemble products to a customer's specification. Let's go back to that pair of jeans. I want this particular butterfly embroidered on my machines, and I want this particular color of thread, and I want them distressed in this particular way. These developments are all able to help with delivering a lot more, moving us towards a pull economy. So, and in this new economic universe, it will actually be manufacturers, not the retailers, who really hold the power. So the paradigm shift I'm going to talk about now is how we're moving from having powerful retailers who will be influencing through our shopping habits what we purchase, to the power of manufacturers in the future. Next slide, please. So an example here of where we think the value chain for manufacturing will be in perhaps 5 years' time or 10 years' time, but where we're moving towards. And there are a number of key elements to what you're looking at here. And the first one is on the left-hand side, and it's the creation of more innovative materials that we will be using in our garments, and in particular, the smart textiles that I've just been illustrating to you. Very, very important element of this change. But the manufacturing process will be, as it's always been, those fibers will have to be turned into a filament. They will have to be woven, let's say, into a fabric, and the fabric will have to be cut and made into a garment. So we still need to go through some of the traditional stages of manufacturing. But the key thing here is, rather than going from spinning to fabric manufacturing to garment makeup, we'll go from spinning to fabric making to mass personalization. So this is where the consumer, the likes of you and me, have much more influence on what that final product would be, made to measure, made to fit a lot better, with some added features around maybe design if it's embroidery, but maybe also woven into the product some technology features as well. And of course, what that means is that the manufacturer now has the relationship much more directly with the end consumer than traditionally through distribution and retail. So that's the second stage, alongside the functionalization of the product. So mass personalization, functionalization, very, very important. But once the product's been sold, once the product's being worn, as you can see by the gathering of those four people on the right-hand side, what we're saying is that the product is now connected. It's now connected to the internet. It's connected to the cloud. And the product is now providing data. And that data is being fed back, maybe to the manufacturer, maybe to a third party who values that data. And we all know the value, or we should all know the value of data. We've seen in the last 15 years how the value of data has created companies like Google, like Facebook, and it will continue to have an enormous value. But in the future, the possibilities will be increased, because it'll be coming from the clothes that you're wearing. Next slide, please. Another example of the value chain and the manufacturing of a product, but this one now includes an area of complexity that we haven't had to think about before. So once again, this is not an easy transition from the traditional manufacturing model to this new age of manufacturing. And it's complicated because you need a multidisciplinary approach. You need to have the skills to be able to manufacture the fabric, to manufacture the garment. But you also need the skills to deal with the technology that's going to sit within the garment, the data that will be created, and what you then do with that data. Those are not those are not skill sets that exist in a traditional textile or apparel manufacturing business. So we are looking at an age where bringing together people with those different skill sets, or companies with those different skill sets, like Google and Levi's, is going to accelerate, because the opportunities to create so much more value in these garments is going to be the attractive, it's going to be the driver of this change, because the value of what you're selling will increase revenues, increase profits, and so forth. So just putting it out there, because there is these challenges that exist. But for those of you who are undergraduates, for those of you that are working in research as postgraduates, the possibilities over the next decade or so in textile manufacturing are unparalleled and so exciting. Next slide, please. We did some research amongst consumers, and about 3/4, even now, can see that this is going to happen. We looked at a time frame of 10 years from now. It could be longer, it could be shorter. The point is that people can understand this. We're so familiar with how technology has taken over just simple things now, like our mobile phones. We've seen what can happen and how quickly it can happen. So the notion of putting things into your clothes that can do amazing things is not something that people think is science fiction. So there's a consumer pull on this. Next slide, please. Just very quickly, as I say, I came at this presentation from my business perspective, and I like this example of how we might operate a very different business model for the type of smart, connected garments that I'm describing. So again, we've been in a push economy for 100 years or so, and we've manufactured a product and we've sold it for £10, and that's gone towards covering our costs and our overheads and hopefully delivering us a small profit at the end of the day. In a pull economy with these types of data-driven products, it's quite possible that the value of the data that you provide from your clothing means that you would be given that item of clothing to wear. So if you think about the investment that the likes of, let's take Facebook, have made in their product, you get given that platform to interact with your friends because of the data that you provide to Facebook, that they provide to their advertisers, and so on and so forth. Data is if you like, the value driver of Facebook, and data can be the value driver of the clothes that we wear. So it's quite possible if you commit to sharing whatever that data might be with whoever it might be, then you could be provided with that garment free of charge. That in itself is a really interesting notion to think about, how you could fundamentally change the whole dynamic of the sale of a garment. And once again, I believe this brings the power back from the retail end of the value chain to the manufacturer, because it's they who would deliver that product, personalized to fit with whatever designs added to it and whatever functionality from the smart element of it to the customer. Next slide, please.
What is this?
So I return to my penultimate slide. So I return to the line graph that I've used all the way through. And what I hope is that I've brought to you just, let's say, an interesting perspective on where we could be heading with our industry in the future. What I would say again is I think it's an incredibly exciting future. To wrap up, if you could just move the slide on for me, please. My final thoughts on this. Digital transformation is only visible now in a few small areas. Digital transformation of textile and apparel manufacturing. But do remember that big business wants to make this happen. It's already part of their investment plans. They are already trialing examples of what I've talked about today. They are already investing and will continue to invest billions of dollars into this development, because it is the next stage in their ability to create value, whether they're a technology company or whether they're a large sportswear brand. They need to continue evolving and innovating, and this is where they are all heading. For ourselves, and I'm talking here about the UK, I could be talking about Europe, I could be talking about North America. I am talking about the developed economies. This is, I believe, our opportunity to reshore our manufacturing. Not all of it, but maybe in a decade or so's time, we may be manufacturing, say, 20% of the value of the garments that we wear. We may be manufacturing those ourselves here in the UK. And I talked there about value. I didn't talk about volume. Because that play has already been made. It's happened in Asia. It's moving to Africa. It's about my socks being cheap and in multiple colors or whatever. But there is a value play to be had around smart textiles, mass personalization, the sort of examples that I've been giving you today. And I always end on this particular slide, this particular quote from Bill Gates, which I just love. It sums it up for me perfectly. And that is, you've probably read it already, but we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years, overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years, and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. Don't let yourself be lulled into inaction. So I'll leave you with that thought, because I believe that those of you who take action in the near future have a tremendous opportunity to be part of this paradigm shift in textile manufacturing. Thank you.
Mark, thank you for that absolutely fascinating presentation. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you for that. We have huge amount of audience question today. So before I go there, Mark, firstly, apologies for a bit of disturbance towards the end. We try to police it as much as possible, but there is always a chance that somebody will come in. So apologies for that. Brilliant presentation. And I looked at your 2025 onwards, the prediction that you have given. That is actually so similar in principle to a prediction or priority document that DEFRA published. I'm not saying they're totally the same, but you can see intelligent minds think alike. You can see some similarities between that document. Our question came from Ashley. She asked, recycling mixed materials as it stands is a huge challenge for all the city councils and waste disposal. Integrated textiles, as we see it as the future, do you think it will be a circular economy disaster for the textile industry, or how the waste management industry will cope with that?
I'm not an expert on recycling or the circular economy, but I understand the premise of the question. And I think I would answer it slightly differently, because I can understand the complexities of recycling a product that then also has electronics embedded in it. And my answer is this. I think because the value in these new smart textiles will mean that the price point is probably significantly higher than, if you're paying for it, than a traditional garment. I think you'll purchase less. I think you'll keep them longer. I think it may play a part in what we believe is an emerging trend away from the excesses of fast fashion. So I can't specifically give examples of how we might recycle a smart textile, because I think we're still in the stage of figuring out how to properly make them. But I do think that they will result in us consuming less, which personally I think we all would probably agree is a good thing.
Absolutely. And I can suggest Ashley to arrange a meeting with me as well, because I have some view on that as well. Our question came from a very good friend of ours, Charles Ross, and he actually congratulated, and we all want to, on your enormous success on the innovative textile and apparel exhibition that you did. It was groundbreaking. It was fascinating. I went there many times because how good the product was. His question is, do you feel that he have two questions related to this. One is, do you think this is the new direction of exhibitions? Because from my perspective, it saves me time to go to an exhibition, travel 30 hours in a flight, which I don't like. That is one side. And the second, which relates to this, is it worth it from all stakeholders? What is your first-hand experience of it?
Okay, so no, I don't think that a virtual trade show is going to replace live exhibitions. Talking to a number of exhibitors at our virtual trade show last month, their collective view and mine is that once we can return to traveling again, we will return to gathering at exhibitions. But there is a view as well that we won't gather at as many exhibitions. So I am aware of a lot of companies who are using what's happened this year as an opportunity to try new things. I know some who have already decided they won't visit exhibitions next year. But my view is that exhibitions will return. We are, at the end of the day, we are human beings, we're social beings, and I think there are a lot of benefits of gathering in one place for 3 days or 5 days for an exhibition. But I believe and I hope that what we have done by introducing a technology platform for our virtual trade show, that we will be able to establish that as part of the event calendar for our industry going forward. So we've lots more work to do on it, with some exciting developments planned for next year's virtual trade show for Innovate. So far, the industry is very, very supportive of that, very supportive. I think that we're all looking now to find new ways of doing business, and this is possibly one of them that's here to stay.
If it is worth anything, Mark, this is my view, and people whom I have discussed about it, their view is it worked brilliantly and it is there to stay, and we want it to be back next year or whenever you are ready. Our question came from Kerry. You touched on that a bit, but we all want to know the technologies you are talking about, when we can go to the high street and buy it.
Well, you can go to the high street now. If you go to levis.com now, you can purchase the Jacquard product, as they call it, the Google Levi's product. So some of these products are available at the moment, but of course they're pretty basic. And I think what we're going to see is, over the next 5 years, is we're going to start to see emerge something more akin to what I've been describing. So you can buy now, compression tops or compression running shorts that not only provide you with that physical support for your exercise, but also monitor it. So in an embryonic way, these products are here, but we're not at the final destination. So again, I used the example of the iPhone earlier as to, trying to imagine what the future might be for what I'm describing, and how we couldn't imagine with the iPhone 12 years ago what it might end up delivering to us today through its apps. Well, mobile phones were introduced, correct me if I'm wrong, in the 1990s, I think. So we came a long way from those very basic and very large products in the early 90s to the phones, the mobile devices that we have today. These things take time. And we're only at the start of that journey. But I think in 5 to 10 years, there will be a regular item of purchase for a lot of us. Great.
Mark, the picture you painted about the industry today, and we all agree with that. Now, that is a perfect incubator for entrepreneurs to come out of, right? There are so much opportunities. Now, if we identify those buzzing entrepreneurs, is there a framework that they can work with WTiN, means to get the valuable data that you have and use it as a platform for their decision making?
So we are WTiN is a very entrepreneurial business. The example of the virtual trade show that ran for 2 weeks last month was an idea out of the COVID crisis and the idea that the decision we took was in April. So we had just 6 months to decide what the product was going to be. We then had to build the technology platform at the same time as selling it to the exhibitors. It takes a certain and build up a visitor base to come to it as well. So it takes a very agile, to use that word again, type of company to be able to do something like that. So we're very entrepreneurial, and we love meeting entrepreneurs. Indeed, we had a whole section dedicated to entrepreneurial businesses in our virtual trade show. Those incubator type companies got an incredibly valuable opportunity through us, free of charge, to present their ideas. And so what I'm trying to say is that if there are companies out there, small businesses, that need help with development and building their knowledge and whatever it might be, getting the message out there, then come and talk to us. I personally, I think what we hear from companies like that, those small incubator type companies, it's the most exciting part of the industry that we're in.
And I think there is a scope, Mark, just to carry on with that. Probably us as University of Huddersfield and you can have a chat to see, because a lot of entrepreneurs actually come through our doors, to see if we can have an overarching agreement where we can help together those entrepreneurs. So probably we should have that chat.
Yeah.
Mark, I'm getting conscious of the time, but I'll ask you one last question, right? Okay. We both are very passionate about the area we operate from, the LEP area, the Leeds City region area, West Yorkshire Combined Authority. Tell us something, what you think the future of the textile and fashion industry in this ecosystem, in this geographic area.
Yeah. I'm glad you asked me that, because I thought you might ask me that, Harry. We do talk about it a lot, don't we? I would urge everyone to have a look at this document that was published last month by the region, and I think it's a very interesting document in that it provides a really easy understanding of what we have just in the Leeds City region. There is a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of resource, whether it comes from academia or from industry or from information companies like ourselves. We sit on a heritage which is unparalleled, but we still sit on an incredibly innovative region for textile manufacturing. What is the opportunity, I think you asked me? And I think the opportunity is as I've described it. But I think that helping to make that happen requires a number of significant developments. So I think collectively, the universities, industry needs to come together and agree upon a vision, needs to agree on what we are collectively trying to achieve that we can all benefit from. And let me put it out there. I think digitalisation should be at the heart of that vision. But we also then must persuade government to resource the development of that opportunity. So someone gave me an example a few years ago, the media industry, whether it was film production companies or television or radio or whatever, they came together. And they didn't go and try and get something for television or something for radio or for the arts. They came together. Our fashion was involved in it as well. The creative sectors of our country came together, went to government, talked about digital as at the core of what they wanted, and they received tens, if not hundreds of millions of funding that they're still investing today. This is what we also need. We need a vision, and we need the money and the resource from either central government or local government to enable us to make that happen. Absolutely. We've got the rest.
Absolutely. And we know how passionate our government is about our industry as well. The document in your that you are showing probably proves that. So, Mark, on that note, On behalf of the Department of Fashion and Textiles, I want to thank you. Really thank you for this. It is brilliant. Thank you so much. And I hope this dialogue, we'll keep continuing this dialogue for days to come, because this will shape the future of textile and fashion industries. Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Parik.